some of these live warriors. Help, chances get slimmer, but God's fraudulent eyes. Niggas probably don't think, but God's targeted in tournament time. Your family more again and poor again. Why? Ask why blindly's blind till the disorder hits enormous to stop. You ain't never had a warrant kid, so please miss you with that running from the law and shit.
Yo.
Niggas be slacking with the jaw shit. Statements writing to want me to be king just like the star and shit moves. Too sorcerous, a glimpse of who the sorceress marvelous. He lost his senses quickly trying to carpet this. Repent now, get bronze.
Yo, Islam, what's going on to the Moors? That was one of the gods I was just playing. Supreme Ruler, Bronze. I forgot the last name, man. Oh my God, pardon me, G. Anyway, I'm gonna start playing his music a little bit more. I just not lost contact, but we both been busy, me and the God Supreme Ruler. So I don't like using people's material if we're not in constant contact. They don't have to be like every day, but you know what I'm saying? At least, you know what I'm saying, we hitting each other up every once in a blue. You know what I'm saying? So we kind of like haven't been doing that. So I haven't been playing this stuff because I feel like it's only right to play people's music if I'm in more contact with them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just like a respectful person. You know what I'm saying? But peace to everybody out there. Peace to Awareness Daily. Peace to Seeing the Rain Ill. We're talking about the Afro-Mexican history, the Moorish connection. Thanks for coming out this evening. Really appreciate you. And I appreciate everybody for tuning in. We got 2 people on the live right now. Usually it takes some time for people to come on in. I understand. Yeah, there we go. We got 4 people on the live right now. Come on in. We have this podcast with the brother Seeing the Rain Ill. You'll be seeing him every other Thursday. And the name of his podcast is Project Baby and Me, right?
Project Baby and Me.
Yep. Project Baby and Me. Look out for the brother Seeing the Rain Ill. That's my brother, man. Great energy. And he's sincere. So, he's sincere like me. So in the 5% Nation, we call brothers who are like each other A-alikes. You know what I'm saying? Usually we call each other A-alikes because, we study the same teachings and things like that. But it's a little more complicated than that. If you're in the nation, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, he's my A-alike, being that, he's dealing with more science and he's pure at heart. So that's me. I'm pure at heart too. So let's go into it, brother Seeing the Rain Ill. Before we do, how you feeling this evening?
I'm doing good. Other than, back home is burning, but other than that, I'm doing all right. Prayers to all those who've been affected in those fires, from San Bernardino, Riverside, and LA counties.
Oh, wow. This happens. See, I don't really watch what's going on like that. So sometimes I'm like, kind of ignorant to what's going on.
So there was the fires, the Santa Ana winds are going on right now in California. It's a every year thing that happens. And so it's hurricane force winds that come to the area. And I don't know how the fire started, but there was a fire that started in the Pacific Palisades, and it pretty much burnt through most of that part of Los Angeles. Thousands of homes were lost. People have lost their lives. Out in Altadena, Pasadena area as well. It's burning. San Diego's burning. There's new fires popping up, with the flames, with the wind that's carrying the flames. But, it's to be expected in California. It's just prayers for those who are going through it.
Right. Okay. So it passed through. So how's your family doing out there?
So far, like my mom's is all right. I haven't heard too much of anybody who is going through it. I know my boy's uncle lost his home over there in Malibu, or in the Malibu area, close to Malibu. But other than that, I know there's family members who have lost things and friends who have lost stuff. But, all the information is still coming in. A lot of people haven't even gone back to see if their homes are still there yet. It's a pretty grim situation. The last time something like this happened was back in 2003. Or I want to, there was another fire in 2008, but I want to say 2003 was probably, pretty bad. Half of San Bernardino burned to the ground that year.
Wow. Wow, 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 wow. I had no idea, man. Um, so I mean, with that kind of information, man, damn, I would like to really talk about that, but it's all right. We're here for something else. So we're
My
talking
bad, I
about
didn't mean to do that to you.
nah, it's all good. It's all good. I'm like, damn, that's crazy. Um, and and because in my mind, I'm like, nature did that. I don't
Yeah,
know,
oh,
man.
bro, yeah, that part.
I don't know. This sounds too weird.
Nature helped it help carry the flames, but I don't believe nature started it. In my personal opinion.
Yeah, it just I don't know, man. I
There's
mean,
too
a
much,
lot of
and then
stuff.
not only that, like a few weeks before they canceled all the fire insurance and all that, State Farm. Yeah, it's a whole big thing, bro. It's
Yeah, so this like it's kind of weird because like before this, I know this is kind of off of this topic, but before this, weren't there like drones flying above people's heads and stuff like that in New York?
in New York, New Jersey, other parts of the Eastern Seaboard. I know they were saying they were seeing drones too.
Come on, man. And then this fire happens like right in the new year. I don't know, man. This is
Nah, there's too much coincidence. I'm with you on that, bro.
I don't know. And you know what? I'm not too much of a conspiracy theorist. For me, it's like everything for me is like show and proof, show and proof, show and proof, show and proof. But sometimes I kind of use my imagination. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know. It's kind of weird. But let's go into it. The Mexican Afro-Mexican history. So let's talk about that. What do you know about Afro-Mexican history? I know Afro is a hairstyle, so that's not really the correct terminology to
Right.
use. However, I do titles and say certain things for layman's reasons.
Right.
So now Afro-Mexican history. What do you know about it? When did you start studying that?
So before we go into that, you had asked me a question last week about ill and bay. Not last week, but last podcast about ill and bay,
Okay.
and how we're named by it with ill or bay.
Yeah.
And I have an answer. I asked and I got an answer. So bay, it means governor, right? And then you have ill, it means or it's short for a deity, Elohim, right? And one of the jobs of Elohim is to send messengers to the four corners of the earth, to all nations. So how your name is chosen is by your qualities. Do you have a quality of somebody who's carrying the messages to the four corners of the nation? Do you have a quality of somebody who can govern and make sure that the law is carried out? So that's how your character chooses your name for you.
Ah,
Um,
great
Now
answer.
to go into Afro, so to speak, Afro Asiatic Mexicans, the history goes back far, and I like to start in more recent history just so those who don't really know ancient history can kind of start tracing it back. And one of the people that I like to bring up the most is Vicente Guerrero, right? Vicente Guerrero was one of the first presidents of Mexico. He was also the president who abolished slavery in Mexico. Now, there was already a clause in the Constitution of 1821, I believe, in Mexico that said that anybody who was enslaved would be free on their 14th birthday. So when Vicente Guerrero took the presidency, he changed that and abolished slavery altogether, right? Vicente Guerrero comes from, I guess you can say, African ancestry, Moorish ancestry. He can trace his roots back to Moorish Spain. You know, I have. He's not the only one either. But Vicente Guerrero, he's his mother. I believe it was his mother who was mixed with, like, because we have to use the terms that people are used to, was mixed with Indian and African, and then his father was African and Spaniard or European, right? So Vicente Guerrero, I would say, is one of the first because he's huge. A lot of people who are Mexican, we're proud to say we know Vicente Guerrero. We're proud to talk about Pancho Villa. We're proud to talk about Emiliano Zapata. And all three of these brothers have African ancestry. Now, contrary to, if you go to Google and you look it up and you say, let me just put it in Google, when did African ancestry appear in Mexico? And they'll tell you it happened during the slave trade, that the Spaniards brought most of those who had African ancestry into Mexico. And although there was another influx of Africans into Mexico during the slave trade, quote unquote, there was also Abu Bakr he sailed from the Malian coast back in the 1300s, from the west coast of Africa, the Malian coast, to the Americas. Now, there's a lot of mystery around it. A lot of people will say, well, there's no evidence that he ever reached here. Well, I would disagree, because the evidence can be found in Mayan skeletal remains that have sickle cell anemia. And they can also be found in Peruvian remains, skeletal remains, the Olmecs as well. And so
wait. So you're saying sickle cell traits were found in Mayan
skeletal remains.
Okay.
So, and that's, they say, science says that sickle cell anemia is something that's only attached to people who have African ancestry. So if that is the case, then that right there is scientific proof that Africans were here in America long before even the 1300s, perhaps, because the Mayan civilization is one of the older civilizations, Incan civilization, Aztec civilization. There is a song in folklore. My bad, I have all my notes out here. There's a song. A lot of people know this song. It's called La Llorona, right? And the first two verses in Llorona says, Todos me dicen el negro Llorona, negro pero cariño. And what that means is everyone calls me black crybaby, black but loving, right? So in the folklore, and this song right here is telling you a story about Asiatics that were in Mexico, right? Later on in that song, it talks about Hermoso huipil llevas, Llorona, que la Virgen te crié, which means you were wearing a beautiful huipil, Llorona, that the Virgin believed you. Now, the huipil is a traditional gown that was worn by those in Mesoamerica, mainly indigenous women. What's crazy about this tunic that they wore, it's very similar to the same tunics that were worn in the Ottoman Empire. So when we're talking about, even in a song, you can find the truth to
excuse me.
No, you're good. Let me read some of my notes here. The word huipil comes from the Nahuatl word huipili, which means my covering. The huipil is a traditional sleeveless box-like blouse worn by indigenous women in Mesoamerica, with a history deeply rooted in Mexica culture. The Mexica, who flourished in Central America from the 14th to the 16th century, used the huipil as a garment that was both functional and symbolic. Huipils were often elaborately decorated with symbols and motifs that conveyed information about the wearer's identity, including her community, marital status, or social rank. Mexican huipils were typically made from cotton, agave fibers, and other native materials woven on a backstrap loom. The intricate designs and vibrant colors were achieved through various dyeing techniques using natural dyes extracted from plants, insects, and minerals. These designs often included geometric patterns, religious symbols, and representations of the natural world, reflecting the deep connection the Mexica had with their environment and their deity. The huipil played a significant role in ceremonial contexts such as weddings and religious rituals. Women often made huipils as part of their dowry or as offering to God, highlighting the garment's cultural and spiritual significance. Interestingly, the Mexican huipil shares several similarities with the kufic tunic, a traditional garment worn in North Africa. The kufic tunic, created by the Berber and Moorish populations in the region, serves as an important cultural symbol featuring intricate embroidery and designs that convey significant information about the wearer. So it's synonymous. In Mexico and back in North Africa, it was worn the same way. It was a talisman. That's what it was.
Right.
Both the huipil and the kufic tunic often included geometric patterns and religious symbols. These garments are crafted using techniques passed down through generations, emphasizing the artisanal skills of the women who make them. So it's something that came, when we think about, okay, well, how did they draw lines between a kufic tunic and this is something that I got out of researching a song. You know what I mean? Literally researching a song. And it brings me to my ancestors and other people's ancestors who are called the Mexica, or called themselves Mexica, right? And they wore these tunics that had these same things that the Kufic Ottoman Empire had, you know, the talismans. I know I had looked it up some years ago. I got to make a PowerPoint on one of these podcasts, so I can bring the pictures and you know, my sources of information to the people as well.
Right.
But that's, and today, you know, if you think about it, okay, vaqueros, right? Let's talk about vaqueros. That's something I mean, most people in America today, when you say cowboy, you think about a European guy with a hat on his head, riding a horse, you know, right, barrel racing or something. Mm-hmm. But the truth of it is that the vaqueros were the cow rustlers. They're the best of it. They were the best cow rustlers in the West. Now we have to understand too that at the time there was slavery that was prevalent in the West, but at that time the West did not belong to America. It was still a part of Mexico.
Right.
So when you have vaqueros and there's pictures, I posted some pictures. If anybody who, you know, follows me on Instagram, I posted some pictures of these vaqueros.
Sorry about that. Mm-hmm.
From the early 1900s. But you have Asiatic, or what I would say descendants of Africa, vaqueros, and you also have those who would consider themselves specifically from Mexico. But this is the thing, though, like Mexico is only 100 and something years old, 200 and something years old, you know. So the land before that belonged to the natives. 1 second. Let me bring up my note on Vicente Guerrero, right? I want to get back to Vicente Guerrero because he's a keynote figure that a lot of Mexicans have pride in saying that Vicente Guerrero was our president, or was one of the first presidents of Mexico.
Okay.
Talking about Vicente Guerrero, he was a key figure in Mexico's history. Born in 1782, Guerrero was of African, indigenous, and European descent. His father, Pedro Guerrero, was of African and indigenous heritage, while his mother, it was in reverse. I said it the other way in the beginning. So his father was of African indigenous heritage, while his mother, Guadalupe Saldana, was of African and European descent. Guerrero's mixed heritage profoundly influenced his life and leadership, and more importantly, shaped the lives of Mexicans to this day, as many of us still revere Vicente Guerrero as one of Mexico's great leaders. Guerrero played a crucial role in Mexico's fight for independence, became the country's second president in 1829. His presidency was marked by his commitment to social justice, most notably his decision to abolish slavery in Mexico on September 15, 1829. This monumental decree granted freedom to all enslaved people in the nation, making Mexico a safe haven for those fleeing slavery from the United States or other countries. And I want to take that this time when I'm reading that to read an excerpt from a book called Black and Brown by Gerald Horne, The Long Walk South. Mm-hmm. And in this book, it says in 1832, Carl Christian Beecher compared the legal status of Afro-Mexicans with African Americans. These blacks, he said, as it is known, are free in the Republic of Mexico, which is to say they enjoy intimately the same rights as do the rest of the inhabitants of the state, which is not the case in the United States of North America, where, as a result of the laws or the prejudices, the blacks are humiliated and pressed down to the category of the lowest level of men. The colonization law of 1824, right? Former slave Felix Howard said there was no reason to run up north. All we had to do was walk south and we'd be free as soon as we crossed the Rio Grande. In Mexico, you could be free. They didn't care what color you were, black, white, yellow, or blue. Hundreds of slaves did go to Mexico and got on all right. We would hear about them and how they were going to be Mexican, and they brought their children up to speak only Mexican. Guerrero's crucial role in fight for independence gave way to a mixing of so-called black and so-called brown in Mexico back in the mid 1800s. And now we have to remember that this is before the West Coast of America ever became part of the United States, or North America ever became part of the United States. A lot of it, everything west of the Colorado, north of the Rio Grande, and even parts of Florida, all belonged to Mexico, the country of Mexico. So there was a huge fight when you had the Anglo-Saxons, I guess you could say, or Europeans who were moving into like Texas, right? The area of Texas, and were bringing in slaves with them. And Vicente Guerrero and, you know, other activists were fighting against it. And put it like this. I say it all the time. When you look at the history of Texas when it comes to slavery, right?
Okay.
Juneteenth. We all know what happened Juneteenth, right?
Yep.
You had to send the Union Army down there to release over 200,000 slaves out of Texas. Mm-hmm. The reason why Texas succeeded, I don't know if anybody knew this, but Texas became its own country before it joined the United States. And the reason why it left the constitutional fold of Mexico was because of slavery. They wanted to have slaves. Mm. And the same thing when it comes to ending slavery in the United States. So that's for me. It's just our fights have always been the same. I wanted to talk about a little bit about, you know, what we've gone through here in the United States, about, you know, back in the 1960s and 1970s, the Black Panther Party was created, Brown Berets was created, Young Lords was created. These were all activist movements that stood in solidarity, and many times, you know, especially with the Rainbow Coalition. And it seems to me, you know, just 10 or 20 years later, there was a fight that broke out between so-called black and brown, at least on the West Coast, you know, at least in California, and with the deep-rooted racism that somehow arose, you know.
Right. And now, I don't mean to cut you off. I was letting you cook. Now, this started happening in California probably, would you say, 20 years ago?
I would say probably more than 20 years ago. It probably started happening around the 80s, you know, early 80s, mid 80s. And a lot of the influence, this is going back. Okay, this is going back to prison, right? We were talking about this the last podcast, talking about how things changed. there was a person by the name of Joe Morgan, right, who ended up somehow becoming a member of a prison gang in California that is predominantly Mexican. Before that, it's not that we stood in solidarity with one another, but we didn't fight each other. The Rodolfo Cadena, who was, I guess you could say, the unofficial head of that organization at that time, was a member of the Brown Beret. His vision was that black and brown would be united. We would stop coming to prison. We wouldn't sell drugs to each other. Mm-hmm. And we would be united. Not only that, but that Sureño will be united with Nuestra Familia, because we're all Mexican, we're all Hispanic. This was stopped after his untimely death. Some people would say assassination. And the person who took power ended up being a person by the name of Joe Morgan. Now, and this is stuff you can Google. This stuff that people can look up. So I don't want to get no phone calls after this. But this is stuff you can look up. And Joe Morgan was aligned with the Aryan brothers, and so when that happened, it took a shift to where you had a whole bunch of Hispanics, so-called Hispanics, that started hating so-called Africans. And I'm not saying that there wasn't already an underlying racial rift there. Mm-hmm. But you know what? We were always standing in solidarity. How is it that, in the 1960s, 1970s, we're marching together, 1980s to the 1990s and early 2000s, we're killing each other?
I think it has something to do with the crack era.
I can agree. And heroin epidemic too.
Yeah. Now the guy, Joe Morgan, I'm finding a baseball player.
Put in peg leg. In between Joe and Morgan. with no disrespect to anybody, who has any type of love for.
Oh, his face looks so familiar.
Yeah.
Mexican Mafia Godfather. Okay. Yeah. Okay. The first white member of the Mexican Mafia.
Oh yeah. Yep. And this is the thing. He would have never had membership if Rodolfo Cadena was still alive. He didn't believe that he should have membership because he wasn't Mexican.
So that's the whole thing that about this subject where it gets sketchy, right? Because even in New York, like I have discussions with my daughter and but even though the people she worked with aren't, matter of fact, I don't want to put that business out there just in case. I'll just say that Mexicans tend to lean more to the white side.
Yes.
Now, why is that? This is, that's a dumb question, I would say, because I don't know. It seems like everyone leans more to the white side.
So a lot of it comes from ignorance, right? Not knowing the Moorish history of Spain. So most Mexicans will say, well, we're Spaniards, we're European, And so because of that, they'll align themselves with the European. Not only that, but there was an interview that I had watched with the brother that goes down to Mexico, and he actually has a podcast where he, I guess, brings to light the Asiatic backgrounds in Mexico, or for proper terms, the Afro-Asia, or not proper, but Afro-Asiatic origins in Mexico. And in one of those interviews, one of the Mexican brothers said that no Mexican wants to be known as black because attached to black is, everything that harms, basically. He's saying, it's gang members, murderers, but again, this is a narrative too that's been spun by the media. And this is something that was spun by the media, in the 1940s too. you know, when they said Mexicans weren't helping with the war effort, you know, and it was a reason for the U.S. Navy and the U.S. and the merchant marines to go out there and beat up, you know, kids, literally kids, 12, 13, 14-year-old children who were wearing zoot suits. And they didn't just limit it to Mexicans. They beat up Filipinos. They beat up descendants of Africa. They did it to everybody. And those riots sparked riots across the nation, in New York City, in Chicago, in Atlanta. And with the same rights, with the police against the police and the military against the people, oppressing the people.
Oh, wow.
So it's really ignorance when it comes down to it, why, you know, a lot of Mexicans like to align themselves with being a pale skinned European, because you know, we are European, but there's also other Europeans that aren't pale skinned. And I know when it comes to prison, right? When it comes to prison in the streets of California, a lot of people align themselves because of greed, because of the holy dollar, and also because they're too scared to speak up about how they feel really inside. I know there's a lot of homies out there in California, homies, whether north, south, central, it doesn't matter, who feel the same way that I feel. And this is the thing. I know the pushback that I'm going to get from all of this is going to come from Mexicans. You get what I'm saying? That's where the pushback will come from. Simply because of ignorance. This is really what it comes down to. If more Hispanics in general, quote unquote Hispanics in general, Peruvian, Mexicans, Salvadorians, Brazilians, Nicaraguans, whatever, if more people knew about the Moorish origins of Spain, now we might be leaning to a different side.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay.
I want to say something. He mentioned the Zoot Suit riots. It also took place in Boston as well, like, you know, with the melanated people. But as you're saying, with the pushback you receive, right, that's due to the, as you mentioned, the narrative that was pushed out upon the people,
right,
amongst the, you know, the Europeans. Basically, anything that's black is negative, and the standard of beauty was raised to be European, and they also will have that stigma, not only from the narrative, but from historical events. They're like, look, these people were enslaved, not knowing that they were enslaved at one point as well, colonized and such. But ours is perpetrated to be far more worse. And look at our current condition and X, Y, and Z. So,
and the only ones who haven't received a nation back yet.
Yes, so
you know,
that's where that comes from.
This is a good book right here, Race Nonconformity. This is what you're talking to. This is what you're speaking to. It happened here in the United States by Brother C. Martin Stansel. It happened. It's on Amazon. It happened here in the United States, but it also happened in Mexico as well, which was called New Spain, but, you know, New Andalusia at one point. And what happened was, I know you know this. What happened was they started putting people according to class. Well, if you're mixed with indigenous, then you're a mulatto, or if you're you know, if you're mixed with African, then you're this, or you're that, and you know. And putting you in social classes. They're literally separating people into social classes, putting them in different parts of, you know, Mexico. That's why Morelos is known for being predominantly African, you know. And then when you look at the word Morelos and you go to find the origin of the term Morelos, it takes you back to Sephardic Spain.
Yes.
Iberian Peninsula.
Now, I agree with you, and you also got to take in consideration too. We have a lot of colorism in all these cultures, not only, you know, from India down to Africa. That colorism, that caste system, is real. That's another colonial construct,
right?
So
that's a fact. That's a fact.
So
now, what about? I want to talk about this though. Now, I've taken 2 DNA tests before, right? What popped up for the most part on this test is the Caribbean islands, Africa. Now, I want to see what the DNA tests look like, because if the DNA test leans more to the European DNA, then I would say that the Mexicans that lean more to the European side, it makes sense. You get what
Shout
I'm
out
saying?
to Q Butter. Peace to Q Butter. Peace to the panel.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, Q Butter, what's up, Q Butter? What's up, Q Butter?
Zion Institute. Check the brother out.
The,
Beautiful
the,
things.
the thing about DNA tests too is that I'm not saying that they're, I don't believe 100% in accuracy when it comes to the DNA test as far as telling us who we are, because a lot of these countries are new. A lot of these lines that were drawn in the sand are new. So when they're saying, oh, well, you're, Nigerian, Nigeria became a country in 1960. Or they say you're, again, like Mexican. Well, Mexico became a country in the early 1800s. So what are the people of the land before the names changed?
My
So
tribe.
the DNA test, it kind of doesn't tell you that. It just tells you, oh, well, you're from this area, or you're from this area, in modern lines that were drawn. One thing I will say is that when I did do my DNA, I did a couple of DNA tests too. My thing was I was looking for my twin sisters. I have twin sisters that were adopted out when they were children, and nobody's seen them since they were teenagers. So I was looking for them, hoping that they did one of those, 23andMe things. So I did two. I did one with Ancestry and one with CRI Genetics. And through my research, I found that CRI Genetics is probably the #1 DNA company in the United States. But both tests that I got back were drastically different. Ancestry said one thing, Cryogenetics said another. But one thing that I will say is that they did link me with DNA strands through my mitochondrial DNA, which is my mother's DNA. They did trace me back to La Momia Juanita that was found in the Andes mountain. Now the La Momia Juanita has African ancestry, and she's Incan. And when you look at pictures, if you look at the pictures when they found her when she was mummified, and you just look at her hair, how tiny her braids are. How beautiful. I mean, she looks just like my sister, honestly. If I was, beautiful. So when it comes to like DNA, as far as like trying to see if you're related to somebody, I would say maybe it's accurate. I don't know. I question the accuracy of DNA. I really do, because it's forever changing.
Okay.
That's true.
Okay. True. Yeah. However, maybe this is my guess, right?
Mhm.
The DNA markers would be based on
Haplogroups, yeah.
Haplogroups. Yep.
right in Negroid, Mongoloid, Caucasoid, right? That class, those classifications. So I would say that like how much European they said that was in your DNA test.
Like 23% or something like that.
But now, like if when I look at you, I could kind of see that. You get what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like me, I had I don't know, like 5%, 10%, something like that.
Oh man, I got 3%, 3 to 4%.
But if
You're
you
better
look
than all of us. I was playing.
Yeah.
but if you look at all three of us and how much European would be in our bloodline, I would say that sounds pretty accurate. Don't you? I mean,
To a certain degree, because I know
So,
two people, two darker people can produce multiple shades.
right, but I'm talking about what the results from our test.
Oh, okay.
So I gotta kind of agree with you on that, simply because, like, even with tracing my own family line,
Mhm.
I don't know too much about my father's side except through knowing what my last name means and knowing that it comes from, ancient India, which it wasn't called India back then. But on my mother's side, it goes all the way back to France and Italy. That's where, my great grandmother's maiden name was Deville. My great grandfather's maiden or name is Lavoie,
Mm,
Valentino Lavoie.
mm.
French, straight from France. You know, So I'd have to agree. Yeah, there's a certain part, there's to a certain extent, yeah, that it could be accurate.
Right. So do you fault some Mexicans for leaning more to the European side?
No. Um, no, I don't fault them. I believe that education is key, and a lot of people just don't know, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and this is the thing. If you put okay, you put a line in the sand and you say Mexicans, you choose, you can stand on this side with the Europeans, or you can stand on this side with all your brothers and sisters from Africa, Asia, and China, and all these other places. Um, 9 times out of 10, especially in today, especially with the younger generation, they're gonna go with against the oppressor, against the colonizer. So, for example, the Chicano movement, right? The Chicano movement kind of started in the 1920s, right? And it just evolved over time. It became what they called the Zoot Suiters. And this is something else I want to point out about the Zoot Suit riots. When you look at the Sleepy Lagoon um, murder, that kind of was the tipping point of the Zoot Suit riots. Um, the media called those boys, they were boys at the time. They called them the 38th Street Gang. That's what they called them. Now, was there a 38th Street Gang at that time? There's a lot of documentaries where the sisters of these boys are saying that there was no gang at the time. But I'll tell you right now, today there's a 38th Street Gang. So effectively, the media gave birth to that 38th Street Gang. Now, the Chicano movement, when most people say Chicano or Mexican, most people think about lowriders, gangbangers, everything that is despicable. But what the Chicano movement wanted to do was bring to the forefront basically the same struggles. We're not just gang members. We're not just lowriders. We're doctors. We're lawyers. We're all of these things. And this is the thing. There was something that was posted today. I shared it with the National Press Secretary, where the Chicano culture is open to all. You know, people of African descent, Chinese descent, Chicano culture. The Chicano movement is huge in Asia amongst our Asian counterparts. And that's what's beautiful about the Chicano movement. So when I talk about the children who are growing up today are reviving the Chicano movement. And with that being said, it's a perfect time for us to align ourselves together. There was a time where the Black Panther Party and the Brown Berets were as one, and the Young Lords. They called it the Rainbow Coalition.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that in today's time, we have a choice. We can either choose unity or continue to suffer under the oppression of our oppressors.
That's a good point. Now, I just want to make mention of this. You have so now black and brown, so to speak, right? Quote unquote, right? For lack of a better term, we're using that right now. Black and brown coming together, that would be beautiful, right? However,
Exactly.
however, the so-called black or the so-called brown in their own perspective worlds are not unified themselves. Right now, you have a movement going on called the FBA. Basically, Tariq Nasheed made that popular, and people are running with that right now. He's like the FBA guru right now, and he's now, I don't want to say he's coming up with movies, and people are responding to the movies, and um, it's this thing about because I'm FBA, I have the rights to these things. And I understand that concept and that idea. However, I think that our people were just going in a different path before this all started coming about, right? I think there's a place for the FBA conversation. However, from since the early 1900s, we were about uniting Asia.
Beautiful, beautiful, bro. That's real, Ron.
So but right now, who voices louder? It's the separation. The people who teach separation voices are louder than those who are speaking of unity. and
Correct.
and, and that's where the problem is. So what if you're really serious about unity in these days and times with the internet, where information you can access it really quickly and just click on something and see it, is that your best bet is to get as popular as the ones who profess separation.
100%. Yep.
Loud and wrong, strong and wrong at the same time. Because I'm gonna keep it real, and it's gonna go off the railings. I'm not gonna be as articulate and clean. We could do the division of FBA, Brown, whatsoever. When it's time to crack, when a bigot come across you, he doesn't care about that. He or she would deal with you accordingly.
Yeah.
And that's one thing we don't have, because, as Ron was saying, there's division amongst so-called Latinos and so-called blacks. You got the Caribbean and the diaspora conflict they have. A lot of infighting amongst different, amongst these groups, the FBA versus the Caribbean versus the Africans of the continent.
Now, Tariq Nassi came up with something called tethers, due to the fact that, you have people from the Caribbean or from, Africa comes here, and then he has valid points at certain times, but I think it's coming more from the West Coast, that idea, no disrespect, because the West Coast deals heavily with a lot of separation and racism out there.
Mm-hmm.
New York is just not as prevalent in New York.
Yeah.
In New York, we're all kind of like in together.
Yeah,
a mixed pot.
Right.
Whereas on the West Coast, and you're right. Put it like this: I've had people who call me brother. We're not family related, but I've had people who call me brother. I remember when all the protests were going on, the BLM protests, right? And I wanted to go out and support. So one day I went out and supported, and I had a family member, not blood family, but a family member, tell me, they said, "Rico, why are you out here? You don't understand what we've gone through." And I kind of just was like taken aback, because I'm like, well, we've gone through the same thing. So I agree. The separatist movement does I would say does come out of the West Coast, and a lot of it stems from prison, man. Real talk, prison.
That's true. And who Juvine says, and the South. Yo, it's the truth, yo.
And the South.
It's the South and the West Coast, man.
Now, what I will say,
I've heard
something in the water. I
heard people from the Midwest too talk about separation stuff too.
Yeah, Chicago. Yeah, I remember during. Not to cut you off, Noreen. Pardon me, God. No. I remember during, as you mentioned, during the George Floyd things, they had issues with some Latin kings out there. Had issues with blacks coming into their community. They had like a lot of back and forth, and I was like, "This is crazy." I thought this is a time where we should unify. We get on the same.
And that goes back to like the Young Lords, the Brown Beret, and the Black Panther Party being unified. Back not even that long ago, 40, 50 years ago. One thing I will say that the West Coast might have to offer is, put it like this: when it comes to, let's say, the Mexican mafia, right, Laeme, right, you have a handful of people who are in prison, most of them for the rest of their lives, who control literally millions of foot soldiers on the streets. If we can't do that same thing in a righteous path, we can take that design literally and use it in a righteous way, to where we have, if they could command millions of foot soldiers unified, they say move, everybody moves. And this is, if we can take that and turn it into something good and useful for unifying, I think that's something that maybe can come out of the West Coast streets that can benefit unifying.
But listen, 2 comments. The sleep are separate. And unfortunately, according to the 140 and 120 of Supreme Wisdom, 85% of the population is asleep.
Yep.
So
Say complete run, dumb, deaf, and blind.
blind,
Yeah, dumb, deaf, and blind for sure.
That's
blind,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's like this is a battle that can be fought and won. However, the ones who are pro unity, our voice has to be louder.
Yeah. Yo,
Wait,
you find it on TikTok. So much ignorance is on TikTok with the division of FBA, diaspora conflict. Even amongst my backyard, amongst the Haitians and Dominicans, it's the most dumbest I have ever witnessed in my life, bro.
you know, there's a big thing too. Like on the West Coast, I don't know if it's real, but I know on the West Coast, it's a big thing between Puerto Ricans and Mexicans. Like they don't like each other for some
I
reason.
don't get that.
Supposedly, you know,
Meanwhile,
I've never seen it, but that's what I hear. You know,
but you know, New York at one point, you know, the Latin Kings and the Five Percenters were going at it, and then after that,
Yeah.
the Latin Kings and then the Bloods were going at it, and then later on after that, then it was more like Spanish brothers joining the Bloods. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
I think that's where we are now. Like the different gangs in New York, they're all kind of like all mixed up.
Yo, you know what's the
and
funny
that's
thing
kind
about
of
that? With the back and forth that they have with blacks and Latinos, I always say there's always a Romeo and Juliet story that comes out of that. Somehow they've G's produced with our G's and vice versa. Because it's always like that. You know what I'm saying? Because where there's love at, there's hate. The hate is there,
yeah.
but there's love is there as well, bro.
And man, the hate just seems to trump the love though sometimes, especially these days. You know,
Exactly.
that's one thing I will say. Like, I'm not trying to single nobody out, but a lot of the racial rhetoric that does come out of the streets of Southern California comes out of Los Angeles the most. You know, where I'm from, San Bernardino, like it's a thing. You have from my clique alone. I was just talking to one of my homeboys the other day about this. You know, from my clique alone, we have a handful of homies that are descendants of Africa. And they, you know, they run with us, we run with them, we don't see them no different. You know, I've never been raised that way. It wasn't really until I got to prison. When I got to prison, when I went to jail and then prison, where they start, oh, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, and there's this like this. And I'm like, wait a minute, but me and him are homies in the street. But it's the politics that you have to live by. You know, and there's something for me, I will always say that it's gonna start, and when it comes to California, at least for unity, it's gonna start at the top. Nobody's gonna want to make a change because everybody's gonna be scared. And that's just being real. It's gonna have to start at the top.
Or you know, I mean, I don't know, with the internet, man, anything is possible. You know, like Tariq Nasheed made a. He's like, man, the way that I look at influence, right? I look out and I look at the internet, like I see what people are talking about and how everyone's like jumping on Fat Joe right now for the comments that he's made on Matt Hoffa's show. And I'm like, wow, you guys are really going in on Fat Joe. Fat Joe just answered like a regular Puerto Rican dude from the Bronx, South Bronx. Like, and people from New York are like really going in. I'm like, wow, we all grew up around this type of stuff. Like, they're talking about the Fat Joe using the N-word. Like, man, listen, Puerto Ricans all like, come on, bro. Puerto Ricans always use the N-word coming up. Peruvians use the N-word coming up.
Yo, Mexicans too.
That's what I'm saying. So I mean, like, why is it such a big deal now? Because FBA is on the table, that discussion. Like, come on, man. Like,
If that's the case, we should stop using it ourselves then. If we're gonna do it like that, we all might as well stop using it, man.
right. Now, so I'm just saying, like, I'm making a point of like influence. He's influenced the public so much off of just social media marketing and he's articulate. He came from a Max. He came from being a Mac, you know, and a Mac's wisdom has to be sharp in order to pick up ladies and things like that. So I think he's Mac the black community almost. And now everybody's like running up, you know, zombied out off the FBA thing. You know, to each his own or what have you, man. But just like I said, man, our voices just have to get louder. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to the FBA movement or idea or you know, whatever FBA is fighting for. I have no quarrels with that. I'm just saying at this point in time, I'm just in for my whole having knowledge of self for me, so-called Hispanics was included in original people.
100%.
So I'm like, how are we here now?
And it goes back to, okay, for anybody who considers themselves to be so-called Hispanic, whether you're Mexican or not, like this is where your DNA, doing a DNA test might blow your mind. And you come back and it says, oh, you're a Jew. You're Jewish. You have Jewish blood. You have Jewish ancestry. You know, we're literally all the same people. Literally.
Right. Exactly. Literally.
And this is the thing. Fact. I have a few homeboys back home, right? Shout out to Pure Uncut. I have a few homeboys back home that are for unity, you know. But how, it's like you said, how do we take a few of us and make that loud noise? And I think you're right about social media and also, you know, events. I think attending events on both sides of the carpet and making it known that we're there for unity. We're not there for the separate stuff. We're there for unity. You know, I think there was an event, you know, that's coming up in next year, you know, that out on the East Coast, here on the East Coast, that would be good to start with, you know.
I think behind the scenes, we need to have discussions about how we can make our voice a little louder with, you know, great marketing and subject matter and
exactly
articulation. But on that note, you know, we got a podcast coming up. We got the brother Cujo to break down the Moorish Empire. Thanks for coming out this evening, brother C. Narain Ill. We will see you in not next week, but the week after. Let's come with some heat. Let's burn the internet up and you know,
message.
Spread the
questions.
message.
Drop your questions. I'll answer them too.
Indeed. C. Narain is not a Moor. One claiming Hispanic. Hold on. If Narain Ill is a Moor, not one claiming Hispanic or Latino, it's no different than dummies claiming black. Okay. Yeah, we are Moors. Right. Indeed. So, yo, peace to C. Narain Ill. See you in a couple weeks.
Peace.
Thank you for showing up. We really appreciate you. Thanks for the $2, Nicholas. We're on with Cujo in about 3 minutes, and we're out of here. Peace.